On to this now. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to deepen, with aid organizations like Action for Humanity sounding the alarm over the recent forced evacuations in Deir al-Balah. Displacement camps operated by the organization have come under threat, forcing families, many already displaced multiple times, to flee once again. We are now joined by Charles Lawley, Director of Communication and Advisory, or should I say Advocacy, at Action for Humanity, for an update. Charles, thank you so much for making the time. Welcome to Channel Africa. Let me perhaps begin by asking you, can you paint the picture for us in terms of the current situation on the ground, particularly around the Al Camp 3, 4 and 5?
Yeah, so unfortunately what we're seeing on the ground is not a humanitarian failure. It's a deliberate, systematic starvation. We're seeing over 500,000 people in Gaza now in IPC Phase 5 famine conditions, which are the worst possible, and the UN Food Security Monitor has called this the worst food crisis in the history, and that includes over nearly 6,000 children diagnosed with acute malnutrition in just this 1 month. With regards to the situation with Action for Humanity's displacement camps, we run numerous displacement camps. We call them Hope camps, and 3 of those are in the area of Deir al-Balah, which was covered by this evacuation order yesterday and the escalation in violence. And this is the first time since October 2023 that this area of Gaza, Deir al-Balah, has been covered by an evacuation order. So that's largely in part why NGOs like Action for Humanity have displacement camps here, because it was considered as safe as anywhere could be in Gaza. And now, unfortunately, 3 of those camps have been affected. One has been completely emptied. Another remains partially occupied by displaced people. It did remain partially occupied as of Sunday, but has now been fully vacated under extreme duress. And yesterday tanks advanced to the entrance of this camp on al-Balah Street, which is the main access point to this camp. And another camp, there are a few families that have that were there and have now evacuated. Most all the women and children have evacuated from this camp. And we're seeing nearby buildings, including humanitarian offices and warehouses, having been bombed, and communications are severely limited. But we're doing everything possible to both protect people and humanitarian infrastructure.
Yeah, you have confirmed that the Camp 4 and 5 have now been fully vacated. Are you able to explain how were these evacuations carried out and the conditions like for the families who fled?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, so how this came about, we got the evacuation orders yesterday morning and did all we could to get everyone to safety, and luckily we were able to do that in these camps. The conditions are as good as a displacement camp can be. Sadly, that people live in what we would call informal shelter, but was probably more commonly known as tents, tarpaulin. We as an NGO do try and provide access to food, to healthcare, to clean water, and psychosocial support for especially the children who are undergoing a lot of trauma. But it's everywhere around Gaza now. We're seeing destruction, homes destroyed. Almost the entire population has been displaced at least once. One of our local staff in Gaza, Hanya, she's been displaced multiple times, and she recently shared her story with the BBC here in the UK, and she spoke about the trauma of fleeing at night under bombardment and the impossibility of trying to find safety in it when nowhere is safe and you're unable to leave Gaza.
Yeah, Charles, we understand that women and children from Camp 3 have also been moved. What's the latest with regards to their safety and their current whereabouts? Are they safe?
Yeah, I mean, it's just anywhere outside of evacuation zone, it's really hard to judge because the phone networks are being routinely cut off. So it's very difficult for us to keep in contact with everyone. So it's
But
as
so
far
far,
as we know,
what are you hearing on the ground?
well, so today alone, at least 60 people have been killed in the last 24 hours. And the humanitarian situation is deteriorating rapidly. We're seeing it with the healthcare partners we work with and work alongside. The amount of people being admitted and sadly dying due to hunger, due to starvation, is growing by the day. I think there's a misconception that the conditions in Gaza are about the same as it has been throughout this near 2 year conflict. But the reality is, especially since March, when Israel blocked aid for 3 months and then weaponized it with the formation of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the humanitarian conditions have deteriorated worse than ever before. Starvation is rampant. The destruction of buildings is endemic. The access to healthcare is deteriorating. It really is the worst it has ever been. And in my long career as working in humanitarian aid, it's the worst I've ever seen.
Yeah, devastating indeed. You've mentioned that you have a challenge of, getting the information on the ground. But what are some of the key challenges your team are facing right now in trying to maintain humanitarian support under these circumstances? I'm asking because I know that there are those obstacles, but what are some of those key challenges that you're facing?
So the first one would be getting aid into Gaza. Israel have a very tight control and are only letting aid in via the GHF. And as I'm sure you've seen, most of these GHF aid distributions, which are backed by Israel and the US, end in multiple civilians getting killed. We've seen reports of people being fired upon for collecting aid. So actually getting aid in is really difficult. So that means the aid that we do that is accessible inside Gaza, that can be sourced inside Gaza, the price is astronomical due to insane levels of demand, but such minimal supplies. We as an aid agency are targets. We're seeing aid workers, humanitarian infrastructure being bombed, being killed routinely. It's not safe for anyone to be in Gaza, and aid workers, like journalists, are no exception. They seem to be treated like legitimate military targets when there's numerous violations of international law. And yeah, as I've said, it's the starvation. People are starving to death. It really is. I know this is a phrase which gets used a lot, and possibly emotively, but I think this is as little as it can be used. It's hell on earth.
Yeah, it's indeed a tragedy. But do you believe that there's enough international pressure to hold violators accountable?
I think there's many governments, such as the South African government, who are doing lots to do this. But the reality is that the main violator of international law, of international human rights law, of international humanitarian law, is mainly they have one key backer, and that's the United States. And I think as long as the White House allow the Netanyahu government to act with impunity to kill civilians at a mass industrial scale, then there's only so much governments can do. But under international law, to prevent genocide, as the ICJ is investigating, every signatory to the ICJ has a duty to stop genocide or suspected genocide in any way, shape or form, even as a third party. So I think governments might, like my own here in the UK, could be doing a lot more to put pressure on both the Netanyahu government and the White House to ensure that this absolutely historically barbaric level of human rights abuses and violations of international law and war crimes stops immediately.
Yeah, I'm glad that this is the kind of response that you're hoping to get from the international community. But let's then talk about the psychological toll. And I'm talking about these families, particularly looking at children and who have been, uprooted again and again under such traumatic conditions. How is the psychological toll during these conditions, particularly looking at children?
Oh, it's horrendous. It is. It's unimaginable. I suspect that almost every single child living in Gaza now has some form of trauma-induced condition. We did a study, so as well as working in Palestine, we do a lot of work in Syria, and during the escalation in Idlib around 2019, 2020, when there was a lot of crimes being committed against civilians in Idlib, we did a study where we tested displaced people inside Idlib to see if they had symptoms of PTSD, and we found that 98% of people we spoke to had symptoms compatible with PTSD, but when it came to under 18s, children, it was 100%. And what happened in Idlib in Syria was brutal and shouldn't be downplayed. And it is comparable to what's going on in Gaza, but what's happening in Gaza is happening on a much larger scale. So I would say, in my experience, that if almost every single child and almost every single adult in Gaza will be suffering from some form of trauma, some sort of mental health issues, people don't know where safety is. People have been displaced from their homes. Most people have lost family members. Entire families have been wiped out. It's unimaginable that anyone has to cope with this level of war crimes and barbarity. But the reality is 2.1 million people having to cope with it.
Yeah, and that's a huge number. But have your staff and local partners come under, direct threat during these latest developments? Are they safe? What are they saying to you?
I mean, thankfully, almost all of our staff have been displaced multiple times over the past 21 months. Thankfully, we haven't lost any members of staff. We've had some of our displacement camps have been impacted either indirectly or directly by bombings and gunfire. But we've had hundreds and hundreds of colleagues across the aid sector who have been killed. I think the number's well over 200 now. There was another NGO based in the UK, Human Appeal, has an office 2 kilometres away from us, and their office was targeted the weekend before last, and 3 of their staff were killed. And this is just anecdotal. No one's safe. It's the killing of people in Gaza is indiscriminate. As we've seen, the majority of the death toll, which I believe now is over 59,000 confirmed, the majority of women and children. Aid workers are absolutely not, at best, are not safe. And at worst, we fear we're being actively targeted. We've seen in the Knesset that there's laws being put in place to delegitimize aid agencies working in Gaza. We've seen with the legal attacks on UNRWA that aid workers are being challenged through the legal and political processes. And as we've seen, as I'm sure you remember a few months ago, people from the World Central Kitchen, numerous people, aid workers, have lost their lives. It's an incredibly dangerous place to exist, whether you're an aid worker or not.
Yeah. So Charles, you speak about the Knesset in Israel. So is there no opposition? Blue and White is not opposing what Likud is doing? Are they agreeing with everything? I know that Likud has got all of these parties rallying behind it. Is there no opposition with regards to what's happening in Gaza?
think that's a very good question. I'm by no means an expert in the Israeli political system. But from what I can gather, reading reports, that there is a groundswell and growing disenchantment with what the current administration is doing in Gaza, and I think it's only going to grow because the longer this goes on, the more undeniable that it's not only against international law, but it's against all humanity of what's going on.
Finally, what message would you like to send to those watching this crisis unfold?
I just think, it's very, very easy to feel helpless and hopeless and horrified, and we can ask, what can we do? But I think we can all see what's going on. We can all see with our own eyes, whether it's on social media, whether it's on TV, whether it's on the radio. We all can see what's happening, and whatever we're doing, I don't think there's nothing I can do. We can always do more, and this is going to be a stain on history. This is going to be a stain on humanity. History will not look on what is happening now well, and I think we'll all want to say we spoke up, we engaged with our policymakers, even if it's just sharing on social media, it just do whatever we can, say whatever we can, donate to NGOs who have got access to Gaza. Just whatever we're doing, let's do more, because we cannot stand by silently. We cannot do nothing whilst people are being killed on a mass industrial scale in Gaza in 2025.
Charles, thank you for everything you do. Have a beautiful evening ahead.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, there you have it. Charles Lawley, Director of Communications and Advocacy at Action for Humanity, speaking to us about the worsening displacement crisis in Gaza.